I've had multiple creepy encounters in my life, but this one was by far the creepiest. It happened several years ago when I was 17, and I'm 22 now. At the time, I lived in a suburban neighborhood with my mother who was rarely home, and I worked part-time after school on the weekends, and it was at a diner. At work, we had quite a few regulars that, you guessed it, came in regularly. But there was this one guy in particular that was different from the rest. He was young, maybe in his late 20s at the most, tall and lanky, and he had a voice that seemed very feminine. His name was Mike, and he recently had started coming in every Tuesday night. It only took a couple of weeks for me to become, friends with Mike. He was friendly, hilarious, and I thought he was quite eccentric, as I am. So we got along really well. There were a few things that struck me as odd. Firstly, he was always making up these stories about himself that were difficult to believe. Secondly, he would come into the diner in the late afternoon and stay there until we were turning the lights off. Sometimes I wouldn't get off until 11 p.m. or so. My entire town was basically shut down and dark. I put all my suspicions away at the time because Mike was super cool. It all got weird when I got my first phone. Mike was showing me how to do everything, how to save numbers, make calls, and how to download apps. He even downloaded a few for me to just get me started. I thought nothing of it, and then he started to text me like crazy. It was all normal stuff at first. He would text me about the weather, about his favorite TV shows, and then he started to send me his photography photos that he said he took of his best friend. I got a little weirded out at this point, because the photos weren't ones that he's taken. They were very obviously pictures that he saved from the internet. Not to mention, the backdrop for his best friend was unrealistic for the area that we lived in. I believe I texted him something along the lines of, "You didn't take those, LOL." And that's when he started to flip out on me. He started calling me all sorts of awful names and started to curse me out. And he told me that I was an untrustworthy person and not him. I was so baffled I decided to just not text him back and talk to him about it the next week on Tuesday when he came back in. Well, he ended up coming in that next night. I figured he was going to, because the server had told me he called the restaurant around lunchtime to see if I would be working that night. He apologized and told me that he was out of line, and we moved on. After a seemingly normal evening with him at the diner, I decided to ask Mike if he was single, because I had this awesome friend named Anthony that I thought he should meet. I was under the impression that he liked men, because of the exes that he talked about, and they sounded like they were men. Mike immediately flipped out on me, yelling, telling me that he didn't like guys. He doesn't know why everyone thinks that he does. I completely froze. I was so upset with myself that I would falsely assume something so private, and I felt so guilty. Mike had already stormed out, but I texted him shortly after telling him I was sorry. That evening, as I was laying in bed reading a magazine, I got a response from Mike. The text simply read, "Where are you?" I didn't know how to respond without A, revealing that I was at home alone, and B, giving him reason to try to come over to my house. So I didn't respond. I was hoping to play it off in the morning like I fell asleep. He then texted me again saying, "Never mind, you're at home." I immediately called my boyfriend at the time and asked him if he could come over and stay the night with me, which he promptly did. Simp. I didn't tell him why I needed him to come over, and I didn't tell him that I had a creepy creeper creeping me. I blocked Mike's number the next day. I asked my manager not to let anyone give out my personal schedule to anyone that called, and I stopped working Tuesdays. About a week went by before I had a weird unsaved number text me, and it said, "You're mine. I don't care about your boyfriend." It took me less than 0.5 seconds to realize that Mike had a new number. He started to flood my phone with derogatory comments about me, graphic stories that he made up in his head, and his desire for me to break up with my boyfriend. He basically went to stalker level 600, and I noped the situation super hard. I blocked that number and I switched to weekend day shifts only. I told my boyfriend about the situation, and he started to stay with me regularly. I thought I'd taken care of the situation until I started to see Mike around random places. I would see him just driving out of the parking lot after I get off of work, I would see him driving in the distance while I was getting gas. Everywhere I looked, it looked like he was there too. Of course, I ruled it off as paranoia. So one night, I was home alone waiting for my boyfriend to get off of work so he could come stay with me. I got a text from an unsaved number that read, "Hey stranger, you home?" I then got a few more that led me to believe he was there too. I sneakily peeked through the curtains in my main hallway to see Mike's car parked outside the house. I started to frantically dial my boyfriend until I realized he was pulling up in the driveway passing Mike on the street. I took my phone to my carrier and had them give me a new number, make it so no unsaved number could text me. The guy who was helping me asked me if I also wanted to deactivate my GPS tracker that was set. I was completely dumbfounded that Mike had downloaded an app that traced my every move. I could see Mike on the map too, and he had refreshed my location just 14 minutes ago. I took a mini leave from work until I finished my semester, and the manager at work handled talking to Mike. My mother and I moved into an apartment on the other side of town that summer. One of my biggest fears is that he never stopped following me, and I just don't know about it yet. I just don't feel safe. This happened to me a few years ago. I worked second shift at the time, getting off at midnight, and I would sometimes hit up Denny's after work. One night I'm sitting in the booth, reading my book, eating dinner, when I look up and I notice a guy that's at another table, sitting by himself looking at me. I didn't think much of it since he could just have been people watching or something. We make eye contact and he looks away. A little while later, I look up and this guy is staring at me again. Same thing happens, eye contact and he looks away. At this point my instincts start to twig a bit, but he hasn't come over to me or anything, so I just let it go. I finish eating and I get up to pay at the register. He immediately gets up to pay right after me. Now I'm starting to get a little creeped out. So after I pay, I move over to the side and I pretend to be looking for something in my purse. He lingers for a second. Then he leaves the building. I wait a few minutes to leave, cursing myself that I parked over on the side of the building instead of the windowed front. If this happened today, I'd probably ask an employee to walk me out, but I was young and I didn't even know. So then I walk out to my car on high alert and I get in. Suddenly he pulls his car in next to mine and he starts to get out. I'm really freaked out at this point, so I quickly hit my door locks and I back out of the parking space. There are two ways to exit the lot. A driveway a few feet away, which is going directly onto the service road, which would take me right past his car, or I can go around the building and cross over into the next door, which is Waffle House's parking lot, and then I exit through a driveway. I choose to go around the building, and this guy jumps into his car and he starts following me. I'm panicking now, and I don't know what to do. I don't want to go home as I don't want this guy to know where I live. So now I would drive to the police station, but I didn't think of that at the time. Luckily, there was a Waffle House next door with a front wall full of windows and a parking space right in front. I pull into the spot, jump out of my car, and I literally run into the building. I look back outside and I see his car stopped behind mine, and there's this just enraged look on his face. At this point, I'm shaking and I nearly hyperventilate. The waitresses, and I seriously blessed them. They asked me what was wrong and I kind of stuttered it. And I told them I think I'm being followed. One of the waitresses coming around the counter stands next to me and just stares down the car creep until he drives off. Then she sits me in the booth and gives me a cup of coffee, telling me to wait a while before heading home. I left about 20 minutes later and I swear I watched every car on the road to make sure this guy wasn't following me. I never went back to that area after work again, though I did write a thank you note to the waitresses and dropped it off during the day. It scared the hell out of me. But to this day, the thing that makes me angry about this, after telling some friends what happened, a couple of them tried to convince me that he just thought I was cute and wanted to talk to me. And I'm like, nah, not at all. They didn't see this guy's face when I got to safety. He really wanted to hurt me. Thankfully, he didn't get a chance. When I was a kid, I would always get picked on by this boy named Tony for having no friends and having big ears. He would always punch, kick, and spit on me. The bullying got so bad that I had to move to another town after first grade. When I entered second grade, my school life was no longer a living hell. The school wasn't outdated. The teachers knew how to do their jobs. The kids were a lot nicer. And I made some new friends. The rest of my school years went about the same way. So I graduated high school and I went to college, and I graduated with a bachelor's degree. I then moved to a bigger city across the coast, and I got a job that I always wished for. So it has now been about 4 or 5 years since I graduated from college. I was living a happy life. Got a job where you get paid a fair salary, and lived in a nice apartment condo. Some nights after work, I would go to this diner about 2 blocks away from my apartment. I would order food and some coffee, sit at the bar, and talk to other customers and servers. I enjoyed it every night I went, except for this one night. After a long and exhausting day from work, I walked to the diner like I usually would, which I ordered what I usually get, and I sat at the bar. I then looked around the whole restaurant. As I turned my head to my 4 o'clock, this one person caught my eye. I recognized this man from my past. It took me a few seconds to realize that this was the guy, Tony, the guy who used to bully me in kindergarten and first grade. He was sitting and talking with what I assumed was his partner. He then looked at me. He must have caught me staring. I was nervous at this point. I said, "Oh no," in my head. It looked like he had recognized me. What happened next is something you would see from a horror movie. After locking eyes with each other for about 10 seconds, yes, 10 seconds, he got out of his seat and ran toward me. It all happened in a flash. I got up from my bar stool and I ran backwards. As I did this, however, Tony lunged so far that he landed on top of me. He held me down. I was so confused at this moment. I wasn't prepared at all for what happened next. As Tony was still on top of me, he pulled out something from his back pocket. It was a pocket knife. In one fast, swift motion, he stabbed me in the shoulder with it. I let out a huge scream in agony, but luckily, I was able to move a little as he was aiming for my face. Thank God there was a police officer in the diner when all this happened. Before Tony could stab me again, the officer had tackled him off of me, and the knife slid across the floor. The officer put Tony in handcuffs, and I never felt more relieved in my life. So Tony was arrested and taken away by the police officers. Then medics arrived soon after. I didn't even see the woman who Tony was inside the diner with when he attacked me. She must have ran off because she was so scared, and she probably never thought that he would do something like this. I was treated for my stab wound in the shoulder in the hospital. I stayed overnight there, and the next morning went straight to the police station. I gave the investigators my whole story, and I went home after that. I'm surprised that Tony even remembered me after not seeing each other for more than 2 decades. It seemed to me that he had never changed. After finding out about Tony's life after first grade, it was revealed that he had a horrible life with his parents. It got so bad that the teacher from his school found out about all of his bruises, and he was put in an orphanage. However, about a year later, he was removed from the orphanage for assaulting many other orphans living there, and he was put in juvenile detention. He was there for a while, until being let go as a teenager, and then being placed in a mental institution until he was 18. I must have triggered him in some way. I wonder why he did that. Only Tony knows the answer to that. He was thankfully placed in a psychiatric ward. He can't be in prison or have trial due to him being extremely mentally ill. I just hope Tony stays there for a very long time, and he gets the help that he needs.
Nightmare Files.